Okay, great. All right, thank you. Well, hello, everyone. Nice of you all to make it. I'm glad you could join. I'm Nancy Hubel-Heinrich from Knowledge Motifs LLC and working with EarthCube and Go FAIR US. So I'm very happy to have this discussion, I hope, with you all about FAIR metadata and vocabularies. It's part of an EarthCube FAIR how-to series. We've been working for about a year or so on creating resources for mostly domain scientists, but also people who support domain scientists on different FAIR issues. We'll talk about, I'll show you links to the other resources we've done as well. But this one about metadata, I think, is near and dear to many people's hearts, and there's lots of opportunity for discussion here. So, hopefully we can work with that now. Let's see, how do I move to the next slide? I have to try that. There we go. Okay, so the plan for today was just to talk. First of all, I'd like to find out who you are. I can't really see you all, but it'd be nice just to know a little bit about, who you are, your association, what affiliation you have, and then just briefly what your experience is with metadata and with vocabularies in particular. And I'll start that out in just a second. But then I wanted to talk about FAIR principles in metadata and why they are best friends forever, and then really dive into more discussion about vocabularies and from a FAIR point of view. But one of the more important things, or most important things, I think, for this webinar is just to talk with you about what pain points might be related to finding, using, reusing, or creating metadata or code for yourself or for the people you support. So that's hopefully at least half of the discussion today. So definitely be interested in hearing from you. So just as a brief intro, first of all, can everybody hear me okay? Everything's all right? Nobody's said anything so far, so I'm assuming it's okay. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I come from mostly a library background, a research library, law library, also not NGO library, but also from a general preservation repository. I worked there at metadata and some vocabulary work at Stanford University for a number of years, and then also at the San Francisco Estuary Institute. And that was more of a data repository, and have been working with other projects as well in the future, in the past, including working on it, building an ontology for IEEE that was bringing together a number of different transmission protocols, including METs. I was working with METs, but that was a very eye-opening experience in terms of, building more formal ontology. So I can see that it's definitely a community process, and both a painful and an interesting one. So that's me. Anybody, Natalie, do you want to talk a little bit about who you are and how much what you've been doing with vocabularies and metadata?
Hi, Nancy. This is Natalie Myers from Lucy Family Institute for Data and Society, and I primarily have been using metadata and vocabulary to support work on FAIR testing for repositories, but also to do taxonomically driven synonym expansion.
Okay, great, thank you. Is it Venice? Venice, did you?
Yeah. Hi, Nancy and everyone. My name is Venice Baird, and I'm at Montana State University, where I'm an embedded data librarian working with one of the EPSCoR large $20 million projects called the Consortium for Research on Environmental Water Systems. And one of the main things I do is to assist the researchers on the project with their metadata. We've been developing an automated metadata generation process. Integrating control vocabularies and ontologies is not somewhere we've gotten yet, though. So that's where we are.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. Erin, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So I'm Erin Delabola. I work for Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission in Oregon, and I contract with the USGS Forest and Rangeland Ecosystem Science Center, FRESC for short.
Mhm.
Government, you gotta have acronyms.
That's right.
I'm a data management specialist, and so I work with researchers and scientists to help them with data publishing, data sharing, data documentation. So a lot of metadata goes with that. And I would actually echo kind of what the person said before me. I think one of the more challenging things is linking vocabularies and that part of things. So thanks for having this.
Okay, great, good. Is it Michelle? Michael? Forgive me for butchering your name if I did. You want to introduce yourself? Okay, how about Don Brower? Welcome.
Hi, yes, I'm Don Brower. I'm in the Center for Research Computing at the University of Notre Dame, and before that I was in the libraries, and I've worked on metadata for repositories and data interchange, and now I'm working. I'm just interested in. Right now I'm interested in how other people are equipping repositories for FAIR and for build. I'm also interested in how we build data tools to be able to use repository data across many repositories.
Okay,
yeah,
great, thank you. Including sharing vocabularies, probably then, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
and the way that since repositories are not necessarily domain specific, like how can they support many different domains? And yeah.
Okay, good. A nice problem. Okay. Michael or Michelle, are you back? Do you want to introduce yourself? Oh, okay, Melissa, I see you on. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm sorry.
Go
ahead. No, please, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry about.
Oh, are you having troubles?
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. My microphone on the laptop works intermittently, and I didn't have my headset handy, so
no problem. I understand it. We all do.
So sorry about that. So my name is Michael, like the boy's name, Michael McCullough. I am a metadata librarian at the National Agricultural Library, and my primary function is as a data curator working on Ag Data Commons. So I'm very interested in obviously FAIR principles and vocabularies and how they all come together.
Okay, sounds good. Great, thank you. Welcome. Glad you can hear us and we can hear you. Melissa?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Or afternoon. It's almost afternoon, I guess. Melissa Cragen. I work with the Research Data Services team at SDSC with Christine, and have been working with Nancy and others on the call today on Go FAIR US, but also on a FAIR initiative that is part of the EarthCube coordination office for the EarthCube community. And most recently, and part of what Nancy will talk about a little bit today, is the Metadata for Machines pilot workshop that we hosted. We ran with our colleague, John Graybeal from Stanford and CEDAR. And so yeah, we're working on expanding our reach and support for both capacity and building the professional community for FAIR in the US. And thanks very much.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Good. Leon, do you want to, if you're still here, and Christine, would you like to introduce yourself briefly too?
Sure, go ahead, Lynn, if you're.
Hi, I'm Lynn Schreiber, and I'm working with the EarthCube office. That's all I'll say for now.
Okay, sounds good.
And I'm Christine Kirkpatrick. I'm PI of the EarthCube office and Division Director of Research Data Services at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, and also part of Go FAIR US. Thank you all so much for being here for this.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. All right, anybody else? Did I miss anyone? I don't see.
I think you got everyone.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you. That sounds like some good, interesting experience and questions coming up. So So I'll dive right in. I'm hoping that the presentation I'll giving you, it would take, 15, 20 minutes maybe, but there will be opportunities then for discussion afterwards, as I mentioned. So what I wanted to just talk about and think about with y'all is the way that metadata and FAIR principles work together. And it struck me that, that they really are best friends forever. And part of the reason for that is if you look at this sort of canonical vision of what the FAIR principles are from the Nature article, the seminal Nature article that came out in 2016, you'll notice with the highlighting on this screen, on this view, that metadata appears in almost every one of the principles. So it's clearly a very important part of the whole approach to making things findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And the thing that I think to focus on the most is, I love these guys. They look so much like best friends that it seems perfect. That metadata, as you all know, really provides the context and assistance to you as even as you support researchers, but also to researchers themselves. The metadata helps sort of ground the project where it is, but also allows the future you as support, the future you as a researcher to know what you were doing. I mean, we all, as humans, remember, think we have short-term memory, long-term memory, and sometimes those merge and sometimes they don't. And so metadata can really provide the context and assistance to you as a researchers or to future collaborators or colleagues. And especially as more data sets, data itself is getting bigger and bigger and transdisciplinary. People are working across different domains and disciplines. That integration of data is really important, and metadata can really assist with that. So from the FAIR point of view, then the main goals as it relates to metadata and vocabularies as well is to facilitate the machine actionability of data integration and data working with data. So that's the whole principle. The F, A, and I and R principles are not really new, but the emphasis on machine actionability is more, and that's where I think that it's important to really think about metadata, but especially to think about vocabularies as well. And then the whole other focus that definitely FAIR talks about, and in the GO FAIR perspective in many ways, is to automate workflow, and especially for metadata creation and maintenance, including vocabularies. So from that perspective, the areas of emphasis that are really show up in that view of FAIR data principles is the use of standards in any way that you possibly can, standards that are within a domain or across domain as well, assignment of persistent identifiers or PIDs, the declarations of license and usage restrictions, and then obviously the use of community developed vocabularies. So I think there's been a lot of more focus on the first three areas there in literature and presentations and so on, but less on the use of community developed vocabulary. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to focus on that today. So just to start kind of broadly at a high level, I thought this was a really interesting graphic that comes from the copyright.com Copyright Clearance Center that talks about the kind of range and complexity of vocabularies that people can work with. So it starts at the bottom with weak semantics and it goes up to strong semantics at the top of the arrow. And so you can see that at the bottom, the weakest semantics are vocabularies that a group comes up with that represents knowledge within their own domain, possibly, or maybe within a project. And then there might be some control on it in the sense that that's the pick list that you would use if you're creating metadata, but there's not necessarily very much, not necessarily semantics associated with it that anyone else could really use. So there may not even be definitions sometimes, or different ways of offering examples or something that people could find. So the semantics of other people understanding what those terms mean and what that range of values is weaker. You go up the scale. Glossary is a little bit has more semantics associated with it because there might be a dictionary with it. There'd be terms of definitions, explanations in the natural language. But again, it might be just a document that would come from the word processing or something that would be built into a form, but not necessarily have that much associated with it outside of a domain. Up the scale then, loose hierarchy includes classifications and different directories that take you down the level of explanation complexity in a particular area with subclasses below it, so that you have some sense of what the depth of a concept might be and of the relationships, but not so much as, for instance, a thesaurus would be. So a thesaurus would have synonyms associated with it. It might be associated with the SCOS vocabulary, which provides mechanisms for associating relationships from broader concepts, narrower concepts, and others as well. So that's getting closer, more and more, stronger and stronger semantics. And then as you go up, you might have a taxonomy, which is a more formal hierarchy, using specific types of relationships that are described and maybe expressed in RDF. And then the top, the strongest semantics we've got so far are in ontology, which is a formal description of domain with classes, relationships, and logical paths to go to find out the answer, find out the relationships and how it might relate to other things that you're interested in. So I purposefully in this presentation, I'm going to just be talking about vocabularies, because rather than anything focusing on ontologies necessarily or taxonomies. But that general term, I think the principles we're kind of talking about here would relate to all of them. And then we can talk about how they would be more stronger as we go on and talk a little bit more about it. So I see another person's joined. Morgana, welcome. Nice to have you here. We'll come back to you at the end, maybe to get introductions. So now this is a part of understanding vocabularies from another higher level, and I want to definitely give acknowledgement to John Graybill for these slides. He's created these nice visual images, I think, and he gave me permission to use them. So he used them at a workshop in 2021, but they're still very, very related, very relevant. That's the word, relevant. So it's about basic vocabulary creation and why you do it. So what do we want out of vocabularies? We want to talk to each other. You see that people talk to each other face to face in the little image here. Then, but we want to talk to each other, especially with research via data in our computers. So you've got one person on one end who's working with a cell phone and goes through all these different, points of the infrastructure to a person at the other end. So that's part of what we're looking at. And the important considerations when we're talking about computers is that looking at data via computers is that they're much more precise than human brains, and also precise, but also kind of rigid about what things mean and how to work with them. So that's the one important thing to think about when it comes to especially the FAIR principles, and that's part of what we're trying to get at with those. The other point is that what we say often lasts a lot longer and spreads more than we imagine as we are working with data and sharing with other people. So that people may interpret something one way that you wouldn't necessarily intend from the point of view of you producing your own data or you trying to solve a problem. And so the more we can make the discussion of the communication with each other via computers precise, the better it would be, either now and then in the future as well. So being able to use the vocabularies to make it easier to use software and data later is also an important part of it. And there are thousands of file formats and data layout specifications for vocabularies. The W3C semantic web specifications are, at this point, the best overall. Another one of these that John just talked about the fact that the PDF is not a good one, and it's not computable. I mean, it definitely has a function in terms of preserving the look of something, for instance, in the preservation sense, but from the point of view of communicating machine to machine, it's not necessarily the best of all. So all of that, that kind of communication path, reflects our motivation to talk to each other using computers. So how does that translate to our work with vocabularies? It occurred to me that one way to think about vocabularies is that, especially controlled vocabularies, is to figure out what questions the vocabularies can help answer. So I'm sure that, given everybody's experience here, you've had the occasion to note that a term, especially when you're creating metadata or you're trying to develop a vocabulary in a project that has different maybe data sets associated with it, one term that's used in one data set may not necessarily mean the same thing in another data set. So does a term that's used in those data sets mean the same thing? If not, then that's where a vocabulary might come in. Or what if the term is spelled differently in one place or another, one project or another, or is expressed in a different language? And then does the definition and use of a term that you either come up with or that you find represents what your community, your domain would agree that it means? And then what if it's important to describe the context for an agreed upon term used in a data set? If you're using a term, but to a specific way that may not necessarily be described within the context of the other project, how do you describe that? How do you make that how do you differentiate that so that others will really understand the way you plan or mean to use the term? And then how can the community support the ability of others, both people and machines, to find and reuse that term that, when there is community agreement more easily? And so, ultimately, is the vocabulary fair? So I know that very often, usually people are eager to not necessarily create a vocabulary on their own if they don't have to. If they're going to reuse something that somebody else has created and works well, then the first instinct is to see what somebody else has done. So what kinds of things do you really look for when you're searching for a reusable vocabulary, especially from a FAIR point of view? So the first question, is it findable and accessible? And some of the kind of requirements associated with that from, again, the FAIR point of view are that there should be a registered location for a vocabulary. Hopefully it should be open to the public to be really findable and retrievable on the web, so accessible, and that there's a well-defined path to that vocabulary that ideally uses a IRI, an internationalized resource identifier that matches that registered location. In addition, there should be a globally unique, persistent, resolvable identifier, a GUPRI, registered or indexed in a community service for the vocabulary itself and for each of the concepts or terms for it. Then that location for the vocabulary should be openly accessible and obviously maintained and versioned in that location as well. So from an interoperable and reusable point of view, the encodings that are available for the vocabulary should have some standard representations. So a lot of times vocabularies are at least start initially in Excel, for instance, or some sort of spreadsheet format, which is better. It's a good way to start working with it. But from the point of view of a machine, again, speaking to another machine, other representations are usually more desirable, including XML using RDF or JSON LD. So those kinds of encodings, and there are tools that can often, take something that's developed in a spreadsheet with its terms and its definitions and examples and all that sort of your data dictionary and turn it into a standard representation in those, encoded in those other representations. There should also be a published and actively used process for keeping the vocabulary up to date, because as we know, language doesn't stay the same, hence the use of BFFs, for example, but ways of keeping up with the way the changes in the vocabulary are important to do and to look for when you're looking for a reusable vocabulary. There should be a description, metadata description for the vocabulary itself. And there are there's a relatively new schema called MOD. I've got a reference for it at the end that is about ontologies, metadata ontology description, I think it's called. It's not a standard in the same sense that a de jure standard would be, where it's gone through community. It comes from Dublin Core, but metadata initiative, that community, but that's something to think about. And as I say, I've got a reference for that at the end. There should be an open license with any usage restrictions declared for the vocabulary, and then an obviously active community that maintains and governs the vocabulary, because it is something, because language is a communication among and between people. You need a community that can really talk about what those terms are and mean in different contexts with different kinds of uses and so on. And then the vocabulary should also include a well-defined and community accepted method to deprecate terms that change. So if something becomes less used, there should be a way to make that less prominent, but still available so people can look at it in the past. That's part of the FAIR perspective as well. So the other, then to kind of hone a little bit more on when you're looking for a specific term in a vocabulary, because that's often, you look for a vocabulary itself, but then you have a specific term and you're trying to find that. What do you look for? So, it's similar kinds of concepts. Does it have an ID, a GUPRI registered for it? Each term should have that kind of ID. Is there, if there is a place from which that term comes, is that source term referenced? And you can use, for instance, DC, Dublin Core terms, :source to express that in an ontology or a spreadsheet as well. And then again, establishing the relationship among the sources to broader and narrower concepts can be really helpful as well. And then the other question is does it really support machine actionability by adding other important annotations to the terms? And one of the things I found, and also John used references as well, is this 10 simple rules for making a vocabulary fair. That the link is here and in the back is in the reference as well. But there's a rule 6 that includes this amazing list of ways, annotations to add to your vocabulary and terms. And I won't go into these in great detail. It'd be an interesting experiment in a working session to actually try to do this in some sort of context. But the importance for labels and synonyms, the importance for textual definitions, the importance of describing or noting any codes or symbols that are used in the vocabulary. Notes or comments for clarification. That's that context I was talking about. What this rule, this presentation does is to give you places in using the SCOS vocabulary where you can do that sort of thing. So, this is something you can look at in more detail if you want to later on. And as I say, the full reference to this excellent article is here as well, is in the back, the reference. I keep pointing to the last slide as if it's in the back. But anyway, per item metadata, if available, should be described if possible, relationships between terms. We talked about this before. If there are any subsets of term groupings, for instance, from a findable point of view, if you've got an author, do you also want to have, do you want to do first name, last name? Do you want to have the IDs associated with them, affiliation? All that could be grouped together under as a subset of one term. And there are ways of doing that are really helpful and can give you a lot more precision. And then the definition of the whole vocabulary, we talked about that already, but using SCOS concept scheme to do that is one way to do it. And then any language tags. I mean, one of the things that's really important is in our world these days is again from a global point of view that domains, especially in the geosciences, and work across. They're trying to solve problems. They're trying to do research across geographical locations and language differences. So being able to tag what those are can be really important and helpful. So from that point of view, then, if assuming that you've looked at a vocabulary and you found that, maybe it'll work, maybe not really sure, what would it take to create your own vocabulary? And I mean, when would it make sense to create your own vocabulary? So some of the reasons might be that existing vocabularies aren't open or don't really suit your needs, fully suit your needs. You can't add terms to an existing vocabulary. The existing vocabulary is not structured in a reusable way. So it's not something that you can take and put into your own environment, maybe, and develop build on that structure. Identifiers for the terms and vocabulary don't resolve, so that it's not complete and maintained in that way. And then other ways that the existing vocabulary is no longer maintained. So those are all situations when it might make sense to create your own. And then, when you're in that situation, what do you really need to create a FAIR vocabulary? First of all, you'd have to be able to provide the information that we talked about all the way through, or I talked about all the way through so far with, the different recommendations. But most importantly, really, do you have a community that's ready to create or adapt and maintain a vocabulary? Because again, you really need a group that will work with you to do that. And very importantly, from a FAIR point of view, is a community willing to share and register a vocabulary so that others can use? That's an extra step that the community has to be ready and willing to go in order to make the vocabulary FAIR shareable, make it machine actionable, make it easily used by computers. So we've got a little bit of tips on methods and tools that Melissa mentioned a little bit earlier in her introduction, and Christine as well. We've been working with GO FAIR. EarthCube has been working with GO FAIR and GO FAIR Foundation, and it started in the EU. We've got a US office as well that provides a clearinghouse for different kinds of educational connections to other people and organizations that are working on these kinds of problems. But one of the things that we did recently was to have what's called a Metadata for Machines workshop that has a couple of different purposes. It provides an opportunity for a community to come together and to do some of the work to either leverage what they already have done in terms of creating definitions and defining terms and defining relationships, and putting that into an environment, kind of an infrastructure that using CDAR and BioPortal, which are tools for creating metadata templates and vocabularies, and then BioPortal is a registry of the vocabularies, using those as both tools and services in a workshop setting to help a community move forward. So in the EU, in Europe, these kinds of workshops have been used to both help people at the stage where they're coming up with terms, or where they're really at an earlier stage in the whole process of deciding which ones they really need to think about and define and are really important for their domain, to later in the process when you've already done that, but how do you make it more machine actionable? So those are interesting workshops that we did a pilot one, as Melissa mentioned, which with the astromaterials and geochemistry communities, and it was very interesting and very helpful, and hopefully we'll be able to do more. There will be more available in the future in various venues. And then the other approach that GO FAIR has is what they call FAIR implementation profiles. So if you've got a profile that you've set up, which describes, gives the answers kind of to the questions about how to make a vocabulary FAIR, and then how to make the terms FAIR within a vocabulary, that there are ways of establishing those profiles in a machine actionable way, and then publishing them as nano publications, what they're calling, so that others can harvest them and use them in their own environments. And so there may well be workshops available with that kind of thing too, for different communities if people are in that space. So those are some tools that we can talk more about if you'd like to. This is the part where I really hope everyone can kind of jump into the conversation. And just to start the process, we were thinking, if your goal as a user of data or well, data in particular, or metadata really too. If your goal is to find and or reuse data or code, what are the pain points in your processes? Or if your goal as a metadata producer is to create quality metadata at the various points of the research lifecycle, what are the pain points? And so, you know, if you're in that stage and are willing to share, you know, you could talk with us a little bit about where you are in the process, what the steps and cycles are that you're looking at in terms of going through this process, where you know, where's the pain in each of those cycles that you can see. Do you have other methods or tools that you're using? And then also, where could you use help or help others? Because as I mentioned, both EarthCube and Go FAIR US are interested in helping people move the whole FAIR implementation forward. So it'd be really interesting to see, you know, if there are things that we can help you with as well. So I think I'm going to stop at that right now. There are the references. If anybody has any, wants to jump in and suggest something or talk about any of these, it'd be great to hear. I think did Denise have to leave? She said she had to leave. So would have been good, but have to join later.
Nancy, I'll start with the question. So you had that slide that talked about reasons for creating a new vocabulary. Mm-hmm. And in my experience, it seems like that's what people do as the default. And so I don't know if you had anything more to say, and especially, you know, if you create your own vocabulary, it doesn't mean it's going to be maintained. So another vocabulary that's not being actively maintained it seems like it's not inherently worse, just because at least someone's way ahead of you and thinking through all the different choices. So I don't know if you have anything more to say or anecdotes about that.
Well, yeah, no, I think, I mean, that's a good point. I think that the default definitely is to create your own, at least list of terms to begin with, because for one thing, in my experience, and I've done this in a couple different venues, you know, you have to really think for yourself, what do I have to define? I mean, maybe you've got a metadata schema that you're using, you know, and it's pretty clear that there's a place where, you know, you want a pick list, you want options for choosing, because the audience might be different and you want to declare which ones they were and so on. So you know, that whole concept of coming up with the ways to characterize a resource, for instance, you know, or data set or something, you may be using, hopefully you're using something that someone else has created that, you know, makes sense for you and your kind of data. And within that, then there are vocabularies that are inherent or need to be created. You have to really think about it yourself first to really understand your data, and especially as you come with different kinds of formats, get experience with different kinds of formats, or for different data used for different purposes. So that, I think, is a really important step to help clarify for yourself, either by coming up with your own list or by looking at what somebody else's list is and going, yes, yes, no, oh, what's that, you know, and then, you know, borrowing it, but also looking to see if it's already done the work for even things like, you know, if definitions make sense, if you know where the definitions come from, if they've declared that this is this is the broad term, this is the narrow term, then that's the kind of thing that can really help you, even if you create your own. So, you know, it's kind of a mix and match, but it can be, which is still useful to do, but that step of really kind of declaring and thinking about or trying to understand how a machine would really need to use this if you wanted to share with somebody else is an important part of it. And that's taken a while to develop too. So if you've had experience in the past, you know, the best thing we could ever do many years ago was a thesaurus or a data dictionary. But now we've got technology that allows, you know, better relationships, more precise descriptions and relationships to be made. Hope that helped. Yeah. Yeah. John, did you have any, you said you're working with the Center for Research Computing. you said you're in the process of doing this as well, I think, right? Have you?
Yes, kind of. Actually, for one project, we are developing an ontology for like maintenance manuals and logs. But yeah, and like you said, like it seems like it's kind of it's to me, like what the question in my head is like, because like you can get more formalized, but then that also makes it more rigid. So it makes it, but also you need people who understand it to maintain it. So it seems like keeping things like trying to figure out the amount, what's the right amount to put into effort to put into it, or how much to model it versus how much just to keep things more open. That's kind of one thing that yeah, the trade-offs there it's not quite clear yet, especially because like the reasoning tools like that is like the amount of power, like the amount of complexity that you want to do or that you have on the back end for like searching purposes or for inference is the big question right now. So.
Right. Yeah, so it definitely makes sense to think about what the uses are of the data. So I would imagine from a maintenance manual point of view, I mean, you're probably thinking of it from both a publishing point of view, as well as indexing so people can find parts and that sort of thing within a manual itself. And then it'd be interesting. So the whole question of whether a part is the same in one area of use or for another, it sounds very much like instruments that, that measure remote sense, using it in remote sensing or in some kind of observational senses. If you're using a different tool, a different instrument, then the way it's described might be different, and trying to put those together is an important one. It seems like it would make sense to kind of define use cases, the simple use cases first, and then kind of build from that. And only build at the complexity when it needs to be there, because it's very possible, especially with ontology, just to go right down the rabbit hole and find yourself down the drain. But if there's a purpose for it, then that's another thing to do. It also strikes me as another example. When I worked on the IEEE ontology for the metadata encoding and transmission protocols, we had 5 different protocols that we were working with, and our option was either to try to come up with terms that all of them could use at once, think of it from that kind of open point of view, or from the point of view of, let's start with one and define one of the more complicated ones, maybe, or maybe one of the simplest ones, build the terms that are important relationships from there, and then build onto it as you worked with different protocols. Because, and the use cases were part of that whole process of thinking about it, because, a schema is only as good as where you're going to be using it. So starting with that kind of small perspective and then expanding on, broadening it as needed, is a way. I mean, it took us 10 years to do this, so it's not a fast process, but it's also IEEE. So IEEE. So hopefully you're in less dire environment, but that's a thought maybe. Interesting.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think right now it's more like everything is locked into like very text-based things. So just trying to figure out any way to get any kind of like insight, because there's just so many log entries. So yeah. Right.
Yeah. Are you building use cases for the ontology itself? Are you working by yourself, or you must be working with others?
No, this is a project. This is a larger project. Yeah. And I think right now it's more exploratory, just like, is anything here feasible? Like, it's more like a feasibility study. And then, so we don't really have anything defined yet. It's more just what can we do? What's easy? What's harder?
Yeah. Good luck with that. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
And then Michael, any thoughts about, or is there anything you're doing with the ag library that's in terms of vocabularies? Anything you're trying to work on?
Not specifically. I mean, obviously we have the library produces the NAL thesaurus, which is a huge vocabulary covering all aspects of agricultural science. So we do work with that. But yeah, we're not right now. We're not trying to do anything else with vocabularies.
Not thinking of turning the thesaurus into an ontology then?
That is, I am not very involved with that, so I have no idea what the plans are for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. That whole process has the disadvantage that Don was talking about of when you are building an ontology, you all of a sudden things become both precise and more rigid. So there are advantages and disadvantages to it. And again, why you would do it is really important question. So sounds like you're wise. If you're working with something that's working well, then unless there's a reason to share from a fair point of view, which and there may well be, that's a project that would need to have a good reason for doing it. So Morgana, I see that you came a little bit late. We introduced ourselves first briefly at the beginning, a name and where we're from and any experience we have with vocabularies or any projects we're working on. Would you mind sharing a little bit with us? Hope I said your name correctly.
Hi, my name is Morgana. I'm a librarian. I work at university in Brazil, for the Espírito Santo Federal University. Nowadays, I have a study about metadata, vocabulary, but specifically with indications by best that data on the web best practice, for example, the indications. So 2 months ago, I have finished an article about the comparison, or not exactly comparison, but I look the indications for W3C recommendations, best practices, with oh my God, I forgot. So I could be neighbors. So I opened the article here so I can read for you if you pay a moment.
So the education in the sense of different types.
So I tried to make a relationship about the indications for W3C, the best practice.
Okay.
If just a moment.
So targeted to university level?
Yes, I had finished my post-PhD in University of Murcia in Spain. So, and my research is about the data quality. And so I have worked with best practice.
Sounds great. Well, you might want to connect with Go FAIR Brazil.
Some comparison with FAIR recommendation too.
Sounds good. Well, I don't know if you know that there's a Go FAIR Brazil office that is similar to the Go FAIR US office. That's kind of a clearinghouse for helping people. But you might want to get in contact with them to see if they can help you out too if you're interested.
Yeah, I have a friend from Ibict, I think.
Well, if you want to, I've got my contact information on the slides, which we were sharing. If you want to send a question to me, then I can forward to the right person at, or to a person at Go FAIR US as well. I'm sorry, Go FAIR Brazil as well. So great, thank you. Thanks for sharing. Great.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I put in your chat. So to try explain better than I speak, so I can understand when you speak, and I can, but my spoken is not clear.
That's okay.
My English is very bad.
That's all right. No, we're glad you came. So, and thank you for explaining and sharing. That's great. Oh, good. Okay, good. Erin, did you have anything you wanted to add about, or any questions or anything? Anything to share with the rest of us?
Yeah, no, thank
you. I'm sorry, Morgana, I was speaking with Erin Diablo.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for your comments.
No, I've been kind of digesting it and mulling over. I am working on a project where we've created a controlled vocabulary. And I'm having some of those same kind of things as how rigid versus how not generic, but I guess more all-encompassing do you want it to be? But I think in this case, like we're kind of like what you said, we're working with a suite of very specific protocols. So at a certain level, the definitions have to be very specific. But I think those protocols are used widely enough that there will be a reusability of it, I hope. Like that's our hope, is that people will use it. One question I had, and I don't know if it's like too technical for this kind of discussion, it's currently in a CSV form. So it's been created using code, and it's kind of part of a code to like produce output data. Would it be better to like convert that, like you said a few slides, to an XML or JSON format for more machine readability and integration?
Probably, it probably would be, because it's a lot easier to use different technologies later, but there are tools to do that fairly straightforwardly. You might want to look at the CDAR tool, because there are and another tool that that's more metadata rather than vocabularies, but there's another tool that Dublin Core has created called a application. It's TAP, technical application protocol, that uses, if you could take from a CSV, and produce a protocol in either RDF or RDF at this point, but also possible JSON LD. Yeah, the CDAR tool also does that. You create a metadata template, and then vocabularies you can build as part of it. And as part of that process, they create a spreadsheet as well, which has kind of the SCOS terms associated with it that might help you decide what's broader and what's narrower. So even if it's not something that you end up with, as a way to work it out in a process with your community, it's a nice way to both do that work and then have it in a format that can then be turned into that, a more fair encoding later. So that's something you might want to look at. It's fairly easy to use and well maintained as well. There are other tools as well, I think, that we're looking at in the US, but that one's been associated with Go FAIR, and so it seems productive. But yeah, the question, those kinds of questions are important. And again, I think, if you've got specific use cases that you can solve, to answer one question, then you've got that answer for that one. Then you can think about how it relates, how it compares to a different use case, and really either broaden or narrow your concept about it, your view of it, and help define a little more clearly that way too. So yeah,
okay, thanks.
Good.
Yeah, I didn't notice the CDAR before, and then I've noted the other one. I think I'd be able to do it to XML easily, and I can look up do the technical side of things. That's fine.
Yeah.
I guess my follow-up to that is, I I don't know if the majority of our data users will be aware or have the capabilities to connect to something like that. Like they're kind of some of the people are more like willing to use something like a PDF, which you said is not great. But that's kind of more the style, or at least the CSV of their. So like that's another thing is we want people to be able to use it. If we go to RDF or JSON, XML would be pretty easy. But again, I don't know if they kind of know how to connect to that, if that would be, too much. Or
well, most people I think that are doing that have got a form in front of it for especially for the domain users. If there are ways that you can keep all that stuff away, all that technical information, behind the curtain, so to speak, then it's much easier to use. Another example of that we've seen with the Tephra community is Strabo Spot. So that's, but I don't think that would work for fisheries necessarily, but again, the Cedar tool can do that for you to create a template, and all of that, relationship building and so on is behind the scenes, and they don't necessarily see it, but what they see are what their choices are for, describing algorithms or describing methods or describing, the choosing instruments, whatever they're doing in their work, the domain researcher. So something to think about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Well, it looks like we're about out of time. One thing I wanted to just include here are the references. It's this long list, but there are some really, this is the metadata for ontology description that I talked about that would be useful. This is the 10 simple rules for making, oops, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that. 10 simple rules, that's really very helpful in terms of thinking about ahead of time about how to make a vocabulary fair. This next two articles are more, what to think about, or sorry, the next article is what to think about when you're looking for a repository, a vocabulary. And then there's this recommendations from the FAIR is Fair project right here. It's at 1, 2, 3, 4 down is very helpful as well. I found, especially their recommendations for best practices for semantic artifacts, and then another one for building ontology development. John Graybill has created this a really helpful resource for SCOS, working with SCOS. And then, as I mentioned, we had the EarthCube FAIR training materials here, include more information about how-to series for short tutorials and videos. And those are mostly targeted to domain researchers. So if that's something that would be helpful for you, that's available as well. Again, acknowledgements to Melissa helped so much with this, John Graybill, and then Eric Schultes and Barbara Magana from FAIR Connect in UK or EU as well. So that's it. If you have any other questions or want to be in touch, my contact information is on the beginning of the slides, and Christine and Lynn and Melissa are available too. So thank you and farewell.